Well, I am so privileged and really excited to have a conversation on race with this panel of distinguished people. And they're going to find out who you are. Go ahead and just go around and tell us who you are, what you do, how you're connected to Kensington. Jess, we'll start with you.
My name is Jessica Wolf, and I'm part of our arts team here at Kensington and have been for the last decade plus.
And you're married to the famous Eric Wolf.
I am married to the famous Eric Wolf, who's also part of our arts department. So,
great.
I am Eric Moore. I am pastor of Tree of Life Bible Fellowship Church and a perpetual guest speaker here at Kensington.
And I'm Jalen Seawright, and I'm actually worship arts director here at Troy.
Brand new.
Brand new.
Awesome.
Yeah, my third week. Yeah.
My name is Cliff Johnson, and I'm the lead pastor of the Birmingham campus.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Eric was telling me he's spoken at Birmingham 2 times and never met you. You were a myth, right? He didn't even know you exist.
I didn't know he was real. I thought he was a holograph.
Now you've met me and you're incredibly disappointed, I'm sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about race. And I just heard this phrase today, and I'd never heard this phrase before. And the phrase was this: how were you raced? Not how were you raised, but how were you raced? And the question gets at, we all have a bias. We're in this series called Bias, and we all have biases toward certain things. And there's a racial bias that we grow up with, and it affects us in different ways. White, black, brown, you name it. Everybody has some kind of bias. So that question, how were you raced, it gets at, when was like the first time you remember sensing a bias either that you had toward others or that others had towards you because of race?
That's a good question. I think growing up, I never knew the difference between somebody who was black, white, Asian, Hispanic. I remember when I was in the 3rd grade, my mom asked me who was my 3rd grade teacher, and his name was Mr. Mack. And so during that time, I guess it was the black exploitation movies where the guy was the Mac, right? And so my mom asked me, was he black or white? And I couldn't answer her because I didn't know. I didn't know what black or white was. And I can remember back to that moment, start thinking, oh, people fall into 2 categories, either black or they're white. And what I've heard was white people weren't necessarily all that friendly towards us.
And that was what year? I mean, not how old you were, what decade?
Yeah, that was, I have to think about how old I was. I think it was in the...
You don't want to tell anybody, do you? That's all right.
It's late 60s, early 70s.
All
I
right.
can't remember.
So at a time when race was a big deal in our country, you're not even, as a young boy, seeing the difference.
I didn't even see the difference.
Yeah, that's amazing. How about you, Jess?
I would say my eyes were really open to it. I was pretty ignorant of it, I think, growing up as a white kid and largely a white neighborhood, white family. And Eric and I are white, and our 2 boys are black, and they're actually biracial, so they're white and black. And I remember when they were little, a very wise friend of mine said to me, the world is going to see them as black. And they were small, and it didn't really have, I heard him, I took that in, but I didn't really have a frame of reference for what that meant. But I remembered it, and I've come to understand it better as my kids have gotten older. And probably my first experience with being raced is when my youngest was called the N-word in 4th grade. And you're faced with having to dive into this dialogue and have a conversation that really we did not feel equipped for. But that's our first real encounter with it.
And I'll follow up on that. So as a white mom raising 2 adopted boys, right, did you think before this happened, this is going to be a part of our life, we're going to have to deal with this, or is it just like, whoa, here we are?
No, I would say I was pretty oblivious to that part of our reality. My friend making that comment was kind of my first twinge of okay, this might be something I wasn't prepared for. But when we adopted them when they were babies, it was, they're our kids.
Yeah.
I never looked at it as I'm going to have to, all the things I've had to do and come to understand in raising them as black children. I did not have a clue, honestly.
Jalen or Cliff, either one of you feel a bias at any time growing up?
As I was raised, I would say that I was always told from my parents that there was tension between both the black and white race, but I didn't live it until I had moved from Pontiac into a community that was majority white. And when I moved there, I was on the block in the neighborhood, and one of my neighborhood friends had said, my dad was talking and says, "Oh no, there's a problem. The N-words are moving in." So that was the first time that I realized that it was present in today's time.
Do you remember how it felt or what you did with it?
I immediately felt less than. I immediately felt inadequate. It was hurtful, definitely.
Yeah. Cliff, you got anything? The myth, the man, the legend?
I would say, similar background to Jess here. And so I think for me, not having relationship really with anyone of a different race made me more just clueless to it and just not really realizing, thinking it's real in maybe inner city somewhere, but not in my backyard. And when my wife and I felt called to start a church in the city of Detroit, I sat down with someone who had lived in the city, who was a white man who really was committed to racial reconciliation for his life. And he sat down with me for about an hour and a half and walked me through institutional racism and just understanding the world in which we live truly beneath the surface. And I remember getting to the end of that conversation, and I was already living in Detroit, starting a church, and I didn't understand it to the depth that he brought it. And I remember feeling so shaken by that conversation. So like I just got to the end of it and I was like, well, what can I do? Like, how can I be a part of it? Because it's like once you are exposed to just how deep it really has run historically and continues to remain even to this day, the response is what next step should I take? And so I would say that was the moment in my life where I was shaken and made aware of it. And I'm ashamed to say it was in my mid-30s.
Really?
Yeah.
We all know this racial bias or racism is not just a black-white deal. It's any ethnicity, really. There's a bias often inherent in us, either learned or, we grab and sort of gravitate to. Yeah, and I'm wondering, even when the news came out it'll be 2 weekends ago, of Charlottesville, all of us saw it in whatever way we saw it. I'm wondering, what were your responses, any one of us? What were some of the first thoughts you had when you heard the news, saw the footage, and realized what's happening yet again in our country? How did it hit you?
Well, I can jump in. I know for me, the coverage that I saw and some of the specials that I watched, it felt to me like it was a moment in which something that had existed mostly in the dark corners of the internet, mostly in trolls on Twitter and stuff you'd see that's like, that can't be real. Is that a real person? Something that has sort of always been simmering under the surface at that level, at least in my mind, suddenly they stepped into broad daylight with no hoods and just their faces in the light, unashamed to express that level of hate. The way I thought about it was almost like it was the incarnation of evil. It was this thing that went from the words on a screen to flesh in front of us. And so for me to see that was so jarring to me personally. And so just to see that level of boldness and to hear the chants and to see what was going on, I think that was it. And then to see the violence that broke out and the disregard for human life, and then the interviews that were done with the leadership. I think in my heart, I was heartbroken because that's our country. And it's not that long a drive from here that happened. And I was very, very much moved to act, moved to do something, moved to be a part of the solution, moved to differentiate myself from that group. That is not us. Like, that's not who I am. That's not who the church is. That's not what Jesus calls us to. And so I think that was my response, was sadness. And it was a little terrifying, to be honest with you, to see that march with the torches and then to hear the chanting and what they were saying out loud on camera. To me, it was this incarnation of evil, but then to think that there's been an incarnation of love in Jesus Christ, and he's the answer, and the cross is the place that we turn in moments like this. To me, that's where my heart went after the initial terror struck me.
I would say outrage, which really pushed me to be outspoken. I mean, there's nothing about what happened with that group in Charlottesville that is in line with Jesus. There's absolutely nothing. There's nothing about another race thinking they're better than another that is anything about the heart of Jesus. It's actually totally the opposite. So I was outraged by that. And as a mother of black children, I was afraid, as I have been honestly every time that something like this has happened. And I was humbled too in talking with my black friends who frankly were not surprised, because we have a history of this in this country. And I think we've really turned away from it and chosen to ignore it. And I heard a quote from Brian Stevenson, who's got an amazing book on the topic called Just Mercy, but he was talking about it. We talk about truth and reconciliation. We can't have reconciliation until we start to tell the truth about what exists in our country. You can't be an ostrich and stick your head in the sand and say, well, we all need to get along. We have to address what's going on.
Right. Let me ask you this, because there is a sense, and I think I've been privy to this myself as a white man, that it is over. The racism of the 50s, 40s, 60s, even in our country, even in our city. You know, the uprising in Detroit 50 years ago was, I think, often, maybe it's white privilege because we've grown up not feeling some of the things you guys just described. There's a tendency for us to think that was the past. We've come so far. We're beyond that. And so, and I may be generalizing, I'm sure I am, but white people want to talk about, let's move forward. And black people often want to say, let's talk about the past. And I think we as white people do not understand, and you can help us here, it isn't just in the past. I mean, Charlottesville and things like that, and there's many others I don't need to get into, make us say, it's still here. Is it still here? You guys still experience?
Yeah, well, you know, first of all, I just want to say about Charlottesville, I was shocked, okay? I never would have thought that anything like that would be happening. I know we had the Ferguson thing a couple of years ago, but to see the KKK and the alt-right groups in this melee with, you know, I would say left-wing people as well. That just totally shocked me. It reminded me when I was a kid, when I was 7 years old, and the riots happened in Detroit. I'm like, this is absolutely crazy. I thought also we were kind of beyond this, but I've never thought that we were beyond subtle racism. You know, it always kind of lurks in the background, and I think we in the Christian community we get fooled. We get fooled because I have a great relationship with you and you have a great relationship with me. I got a great relationship with Steve. And so I'm around black or white Christian brothers that love the Lord. And so we don't treat one another like that. But you can get lulled into sleep that the world is like that too, right? But as long as sin exists, it's going to manifest itself some way. And one of the easiest way is just, the simplest, I think the base way is just by how another person looks, right? Because I'm lighter than them or darker than them or my hair is curly or, you know, whatever it is, I can feel like my group is better than the other group. And that's so wrong and that's so anti-Christian.
For me, it's definitely still here. It's definitely alive. When I looked at the thing that happened in Charlottesville, immediately I was upset. I was shocked at how outright it was, but part of me said, well, here's another problem that won't have a solution. And part of me said that I knew that there would be people that would explain it away. And so, like you said, I believe that there's no doubt there has been strides that has been made all throughout history. Laws have changed, and through like desegregation and all that, we have made strides. But the subtlety comes in the relationships and the interpersonal contact that we have with each other. There has been instances where I've seen discrimination within the past 3 and 4 weeks. So I definitely still feel it's alive, and I think that when you come into the suburbs, you find it more. I never have to think about being black or if I'm black when I'm in the city, like Detroit or Pontiac. I'm not worried about that, but I'm constantly reminded that I'm black when I step into the suburbs.
Yeah, you shared the other day, I don't know if you said Oxford or Clarkson or something. You said today you walk in a store. Tell that. You think about what's in your hands walking into a store.
Yes, when I walk into a store, me and my wife, I'm always very aware of who is watching. I'm always very aware of what's going on around me. My wife doesn't bring her purse into the store often, and I keep my hands to my side because there have been numerous times that I have been either accused of stealing or followed by security. And so I am always very careful whenever I go into the mall, the store. It's almost like a fear that you live in, but it becomes defensive. So it's not necessarily that I feel fear.
Yeah. And I mean, looking at you, I know you are a scary looking dude, so I can understand. No, honestly, I'm looking at you thinking the opposite, don't you? I mean, you look at you and you look like one of the most polite, young men. So there's got to be only one reason they're doing that. It's a color racial bias. I'm generalizing, but that's got to be what's going on, because you would not look at you and say, this guy looks like a thug. It's not there at all. Eric, you shared a story at Orion campus the last time you spoke. See, he knows that I actually pastor at that campus. We know each other, unlike Cliff. But, you were there, and it was right after, it wasn't Ferguson, but another incident in our country. And so it was such a gift to our campus to have you speak from a black man's perspective, even into that situation. Again, I don't even remember which one it was, but you told a story that I'll never forget that helps educate not just me, but everyone to how it's different growing up in different skin color. Right. You talked about how you teach your son to drive. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so he's driving now, and he had this incident that I told you. Somebody at school had called him the N-word. But he was with me. It was a number of years ago, maybe about 2 or 3, and we were driving, and I guess my tail light was out. Of course, I didn't know that, and a policeman comes up, lights are flashing, and so I pull over, and right at that moment, my son's right there. He's about to take his driving lessons, and I'm like, hey, watch everything I do. Okay, roll down the window, put my hands 10 and 2, had my wallet out, everything that the cop asked, I gave to him. I was polite, didn't make any unnecessary moves, because when I get pulled over by the police, and I think I just told you this past week I got pulled over too, I'm not moving. I am not moving. I'm going to make sure that my hands are there. And my purpose in that lesson was because I don't want to see my son get shot for doing nothing wrong. Now, maybe that's an irrational fear, right? I got a doctorate degree. I think I'm pretty polished. I'm going to be polite or whatever. But it is part of my whole thought process. And so, as a result, I pass that on to my kids. And then so when you see something on TV where you see a cop interacting with a black man and they end up getting shot or whatever, it's true. You look there and you say, man, he shouldn't have resisted arrest. He should have been courteous. He should have done the right things. But there's also in your mind is I can do all the right things and I can still be dead tomorrow.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, when you just shared that right now, I mean, I'm literally fighting back tears. Because I'm like, how sad is that? I've never once had that thought as a white man. I've never thought of those things when I taught my sons to drive. It's not even in my it's never on my radar. And this is your reality. I mean, I'm just sitting there going, oh my gosh, listen to what you're saying. It's unbelievable that a dad would have to do that 50 years after the right. It's like we're in a new day, right? No, we're still, these patterns are there, and it's not just policemen, it's everyone that you'd have to do that. And you did this. It was interesting, you said these old thought patterns, and I thought you're sort of referring to a history, right? That's sort of what this means, that you have grown up, and we all have, with history that doesn't go away. It's part of how we think, and it's ever present in our life. And I think it's interesting because so often, so many of us white people sitting here in this church or anywhere don't understand this.
I've had an interesting experience with this, and just so you know too, if you're sitting in the audience and you're white, you might be hearing white privilege used, and you're like, well, I don't have white privilege. I worked hard for what I have. That's not what white privilege is. It's what they're saying. It's subtleties in your day-to-day life where you have an advantage that you don't even realize you have because of the color of your skin. I saw this illustrated when my boys and I have started debriefing, honestly, every violent encounter that has been in the media, and there have been a lot with driving and police interactions and things. So one day I was doing with them what you did with your son. I was saying they're not driving yet, but they're close, and saying this is what you do if you get pulled over. And here I went through all the things that I know of that I've heard from black friends and was trying to educate them. And when I was done, they sat there and we were in the car, and they said to me, "Is that what Dad has to do if he gets pulled over?" And I paused to consider my answer, and I said, "No, because Dad is white." And I said, "That's not right. That's not fair." And I try really hard to remind them, too, that it's not how Jesus sees them, that Jesus does not see them as inferior. But I'm also faced with, I'm raising young black men. I have to educate them on how some in the world are going to see them. But it was the white privilege. It was like, no, your white father does not have to follow these rules because he's not going to be judged the same way.
Right. And just in case you're out there wondering, because I'm listening to this going, it sounds like pastors get pulled over a lot. It's just bad drivers. I mean, these guys get pulled over because they deserve to. No, here's my next question is like, now, not every relationship is that way. I mean, not every black person feels that way. Not every white person feels that way. Talk about this. What are relationships that you have in your life with white, black, brown, you name it, any different ethnicity, you know what I mean, race, that are good? What's it look like when you feel valued, white or black, by someone of a different color? What does that look like? What does a person do in word and deed to make you feel valued? Don't jump right in too quick.
Well, it's kind of interesting because growing up in Detroit, all I had was black friends, right? And so, matter of fact, one quick tidbit, I didn't even know we were the minority till I moved out of Detroit. I thought because it was so black, I thought, hey, we were in control, right? So, but now I could say probably, not that I have a good white friend. I would say half of my friends are of a different ethnicity. And the common thread in that is that we like each other. We encourage each other. We hang out together. We just, we try different foods or different activities, right? And so even though I may look across and initially know that person's white or Asian or Hispanic, after a while, I hate to say it, I don't even see it anymore, right? That's just Joe. That's just Dave. That's just Aaron. That's just who they are. I mean, so initially, yeah, when you first see somebody, you notice the differences. But once you connect on a heart level, there's very, very little difference, maybe some cultural differences, but very little. And I think it's the same things that would encourage somebody who looks like you, and the same thing that somebody who looks like you would encourage you. I think it's the same across ethnicities.
I'm very similar to you, not in necessarily school systems, but in my neighborhoods and my church growing up. I didn't know that I was a minority either. I grew up in Pontiac. I didn't move out to Oxford until I was about 12 or 13 years old. And when I got there, that is when it flipped from my friends being all black or majority black to my friends being the majority of them being white. And I think what a good relationship looks like is one that doesn't see color but sees the heart. And I know for me, some of my best friendships, one of my best friends, he is white. And when we sit down, it's never about, me being black and him being white. It's a real relationship. I mean, we talk about things, we share things, we're transparent with one another, and never do I feel like that is his point or his motive. What motivates him is that I'm black, and that's why he wants to be my friend, or that's why he doesn't want to be my friend. We're equal.
Yeah. Talk about this. Talk about God's heart. Talk about what the church's response should be. How do you think God views, what's God's heart on race, on this issue? What would you want to say to church people? This is the heart of God. Any one of you.
If I could hop in, I think something that reveals the heart of God can be seen in who Jesus chose to be his 12 disciples. Because, as the Gospels unfold, you've got Jesus saying, come follow me, come follow me, come follow me. And in my mind growing up, I always thought he just called 12 guys and that was that. But then the more you dive into the scripture and look closer, there was a moment where he sent out the 72 that were with him the whole time. So now you've got 12 plus 72, you've got 84. Then you got this passage in Luke chapter 6 where you've got this big crowd of disciples that Jesus has called that are with him. Then Jesus goes up by himself to pray, and then he came down and he chose the 12. So I think that's interesting because he made an intentional choice for each of those 12. And within his discipleship group, he had one guy in particular whose name was Simon the Zealot. And the Zealots were so committed to Israel and sort of getting back to that state that they were in under David. And they were so committed to that purity of their nation that they did not see violence as incompatible with following God's laws, because they prioritized getting rid of idolatry over loving their neighbors. So these were the guys that would go and have these public, almost like terrorist moments in the square. One of their favorite targets to send a message to the people that were following Rome in Jesus' day was to either assassinate or violently attack different parts of their society that they believed were sellouts, maybe Sadducees that sold out, especially though tax collectors were the guys they really wanted to make a message with because they had turned their backs on their people. So I look at Simon the Zealot in Jesus' disciple group, and then I look at Matthew the tax collector in Jesus' group that Jesus chose, said, follow me. So here you have two guys, polar opposites, total enemies, sitting across from each other for 3 years. And Jesus looks at them and tells them to love one another. Jesus looks at them in John 17 and says, be one. As I and the Father are one, be one, that there be unity. And what I love is that Jesus is the third way. Jesus Christ is that relationship of following him. The transformation that happens in Jesus Christ wipes out the racism, wipes out the hate between groups that are supposed to be enemies. And that's where I think the church's heart needs to lie, in that who did Jesus choose to associate himself with, and who do I choose to bring into my life to see, can Jesus be that third way of relationship beyond just trying to convert someone's thinking, but really going after their heart?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful picture of the color of God and of the proactiveness of a God himself and a Christ follower stepping into color, stepping into race. I am going to make the first move. And I'll end with this because for sake of time, we could go on for several hours. We really could. I'm learning a ton. I'm sure everybody is. One of the things that hits me, and I'm sure it hits you guys, we haven't even talked about this, but the longest prayer recorded in the New Testament of Jesus, so many people think it's the Lord's Prayer. Our Father art in heaven, our Father prayer. That's not the one. It's a prayer in John 17. You guys know it. We all know it, but it's almost a full chapter prayer. And the heart of Jesus' prayer, I'm not telling them anything because they know this. I hope you understand this, is about one topic. What? Unity. He prays to the Father that the church of all colors would be unified and be one, just as he and the Father are one. And it's also interesting, he says twice why he prays that prayer. Do you remember? So that, purpose statement, God, I'm praying that you would make the church decades, centuries later, one, unified like we are, so that the world will know that you sent me. In other words, when the church is unified with different races, different genders, you name it, when it's one, it's a picture to the world there really is a God, And he's won, and he sent his son, a son who breaks down all barriers and is a God of love, to say, I love you and I want you to love one another as the Father has loved me. I mean, to me, that is the prayer of God for us now, before, and in the future. And I hope, I mean, part of this conversation, I hope this is a model for the future of Kensington and of all of the church, that we could be the picture to the world of what God's heart is. And I'm going to pray that. I'm going to end this discussion with the same prayer Jesus prayed in my own words. You join me? Let's unify. In fact, let's do this. I know I didn't tell you this. I'm a touchy-feely guy. I love holding hands and that kind of thing. And I'm going to ask the congregation to do the same thing I'm doing right now. Reach out, grab the hand of the person sitting beside you. I know you may have come with them. You may not even know them. You may not even want to touch them. I know it's a weird deal, but it's a unifying move to say, I want to hold hands, lock arms with my brother or my sister that may look like me, that may be like me, may be totally different than me, in this moment as the church, to say, I want to be unified as we pray for unity. So let's pray. Father God, thank you. Thank you for the beauty of color, the beauty of men and women, boys and girls being made in your image. We are all image bearers of you, none more or less. We are all equal under you and through the cross. And you prayed for unity, and so I pray as well, that we would lead the way in unity, that this locking of arms, of holding hands, is not just something we do in a moment in a church service, but it would be something we do as we walk out of this church, to live as people who honor you and reflect you to everyone. God, use us as your church, to be the church, to unify the world. And I'll quote what I heard Pastor Chris Brooks say, a divided church cannot help heal a divided nation. So God, I pray that you would make us a united church and use us to be your vessel, your hands and feet, to be part of the solution to a divided nation. God, use us to show the world that you are alive. And we love you, and we pray in your son's beautiful name, the name of Jesus. Amen.